I am now joined by a professor of energy and electricity law at the University of Lagos, Professor Yemi Oke, for discussion on the new Electricity Act and proposed hike in tariff. Professor Oke is a pioneering electricity law scholar in Africa. Thank you very much for joining us, Prof. Thank you.
My pleasure, and thanks for having me.
All right. So, as the pioneer electricity law scholar in Africa, how will you describe the investment environment in Nigeria?
As far as the power sector is concerned, the investment climate pre-Bola Ahmed Tinubu presidency is nothing to write home about. First and foremost, and when we had the privatization in the power sector, Nigerians, of course, we've said this several times, Nigerians expected that there will be inflow of capital from foreigners into Nigeria, and that did not happen. That did not happen because the investment climate was not that conducive, and Nigerian investors merely approached Nigerian banks for what technically we refer to as acquisition financing, money, initial funds to acquire certain entities and keep it. So there weren't the financial wherewithal to take it forward, and Nigerian banks were unduly exposed to power sector lending. And another challenge then was that because money didn't come from abroad, and that challenge was that at the time the players, investors approached most Nigerian banks for power sector lending, initial lending. And Naira was around 160 to 166 to a dollar. And that was the rate they gave to them. And the challenge for us and for them was we were curious because they borrowed Naira up dollars from the Nigerian banks to trade in Naira. So when Naira headed south, meaning Naira got depreciated to like 400, 500, thereabout, the entities started having problems. And that is why today, the discos in particular are struggling. They are not solvent because money did not actually come in from overseas. We just tried to mop up few foreign exchange in the system. And that led to the death of one or three or four banks in Nigeria because of needless exposure. But now, with the new regime under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, first with the signing into law of a recent constitutional amendment that allows states to now generate, transmit, and distribute electricity, and the new Electricity Act 2023, we can now expect that the structure will be different, and we can now see serious players coming on board to invest in the power sector.
All right. So, Prof, what will you consider as the most critical interventions needed for stable power supply in Nigeria?
I've said a number of them. I think sometime in your studio, I mentioned like 20. Gladly, most of what we're advocating, most, not all, have been captured in the new laws which we've been advocating for more than 20 years. Because starting with, we felt the law that has now been repealed, the Electric Power Sector Reform Act, was not intended as a law to operationalize the power sector. It was just a law, a piece of legislation to midwife power sector reforms. So now that we're done with reforms, we needed now to have a law that will speak to effective sector governance and regulation. So that's the law we have now. Though I will admit that the law is not perfect because we still have some critical issues that we advocated for that are not in the law. But an imperfect law, I would rather an imperfect law than no law. There's even no perfect law anywhere in the world anyway. We can make do with this, test the laws, and try to note certain areas or whatever areas for future amendment. So, talking about what we need to do, I think we need to look in the direction of the regulator. everything boils down to how effective we are regulating ourselves as a polity. Who is regulating? How are they regulating? What's the response level? Do we have a regulator that is truly, truly independent in the sense of independence of regulator? We have a regulator that is knowledge-based regulation, or do we have a bunch of people appointed into the NERC to regulate, and the appointment was just not based on merit, but a kind of what we call national character, with some of us sometimes jokingly referred to as federal bad, national bad character, because federal character in the real sense of it is not meant for you now or to enable us appointing competent people. It's meant to support appointment across the national structure. But we've sort of misapplied that framework to the extent that incompetent persons sometimes got appointed or nominated from their region or from their state. And then let's say that's the candidate they have because one political figure is supporting them. And that doesn't work. We now need to look for competent people, knowledge-based sector regulation. The sector is as good as its regulator, because the regulator, everything, the box stops on the table of the regulator if things are not properly done. If the CBN is not effectively regulating the fiscal policy and the banking sector, then we're going to have most banks failing. So the same thing in the power sector, both for the GENCOs, the DISCOs, and the transmission company of Nigeria, and other bodies in the sector, other agencies and parastatals in the sector. So one, effective sector regulation. Two, there's no amount of rejigging that we can do now without going through another round of reacquisition and refinancing in the power sector, particularly for entities in the hands of some GENCOs and DISCOs. I'm aware the federal government has a big chunk in these entities. I'm looking at a situation in which the asset or the stocks or the equity of the federal government is diluted, meaning the DISCOs also may be engaged to surrender some of their equity so that we can financially and technically buoyant investor now to come with foreign direct investment, bringing dollars now that we have a single exchange rate, bringing in the dollars to come and invest in the power sector under the new regime. So we need now, because most of the DISCOs are technically insolvent, a number of them, quite a number of them, significant number of them are under one form of receivership or administrator because of power sector debt that they are owning to the whole Nigerian bank and other lenders.
All right, so let's talk about the new Electricity Act. I mean, let me ask you, how significant are the provisions in the quest for stable power supply in the country?
Well, the law, I would say, what brings about development is not the law itself. There can never be a perfect law. What brings about development as effectiveness in a polity is how those laws have been operationalized. Who is implementing which laws? Who is driving the implementation of the law? So it's about the managers, the handlers of the sector. The law, as it were, has brought about some important reforms in the power sector, commendably so. I observed the fact that now it frees up the structure for state to participate in every level of the law. And that's hugely significant. I've been advocating that states under the old structure should be able to generate, transmit, and distribute in respect of areas not covered by a national grid, because the Repeal Act gives that window. Because I argued, the Constitution says they can't do it, but the Repeal Act seems to go against it and advise states to explore the constitutional provisions to do it. But now that we have a law that is expressly incorporates that power, the power of states to regulate the electricity sector in their respective states. Now, the challenge is even more because the states cannot generate, transmit, and distribute in respect of areas covered by a national grid, as well as areas not covered by a national grid. So the institutional responsibility of states seems enormous. Nigerians may now want to look towards the direction of their states as against the federal government because the federal monopoly is being removed and nested substantially. So we expect states to be able to attract investors, and that is where the challenge comes in. States that are not prudent with their finances, states that are not run sustainably, states that don't comply or obey the terms of the agreement, states that are heavily indebted, states that are not being managed effectively may not likely attract investors in their power sectors because they refer to those states at high risk. Because everything boils down to the bankability of the investment. The question is, if they bring in their money, are they sure of being able to recoup their investment with reasonable yield? So if the answer is yes, they're going to invest. If the answer is no, they're not going to invest. Nobody's going to invest in a state because the governor is handsome or because the commissioner or minister in charge is beautiful. That's fundamental. So there are no sentimental considerations when we talk about serious investment like in the power sector because it's capital intensive. But the new law allows states to so regulate. So the states are now going to deploy their institutional structures to attract investors by providing enabling environment. States that are unwilling to provide an enabling environment will have to be in darkness, unfortunately. You may see states say having like 18 or 20 hours of electricity per day, and state B may be in darkness. So it's a question now of the competitive edge of a particular state. Another thing is that unlike what we had in the old law, which also was there to enable people to generate without transmitting if it's less than 1 megawatt. Now, individuals, communities can now generate for their own use up to 1 megawatt. We have the new framework also encourages a lot of renewables and integrated approaches to the power sector, what we call NESI, Nigerian Electricity Supply Industry. I look at another aspect that is not being sufficiently addressed, which is the metering. Metering is key. And I said, okay, now that we have this new framework, we should have a regime that allows meter manufacturers to be directly responsible for metering of Nigeria. Because they manufacture these meters, they can sit with the respective discos in a particular region to calibrate. And everything about metering is sorted. It's like the telephone industry. You're going to buy your handset from whatever supplier. You can buy any brand of handset that you can afford and get enrolled with a service provider. That's the kind of structure we'll eventually go. We're even going to see effective deployment of technology in metering, and this will help stem the tide of meter bypass and all kinds of electricity theft that we've witnessed in the country.